Well, hello and welcome to Talk Leadership with Cedrick. We appreciate you joining us this evening. We're going to have a real discussion about the the George Floyd situation and the killing of Black people in America. The growing list of unarmed Black men and boys killed because they are perceived to be dangerous has been a trigger for protests in communities around the country. See, the tragic deaths at the hands of police officers and armed citizens are vivid examples of the role that race and perception plays in the experience of Black men and boys in the United States. See, the protests are outward expressions of grief and rage at a broader array of injustices Black males face, as the stereotypes linking them to danger, criminality, which creates obstacles in education, in the workplace, finding housing, and simply being seen as human. The paradox is that these injustices are occurring even as most Americans of all races and ethnicities reject racism. Through discussion, reflection, and action, we can move toward a more favorable future. Now, tonight, I have four distinguished gentlemen with me, and we're going to have real dialogue and discussion. I want to introduce each of them. I'm going to start with Mr. Ryan C. George. Ryan is a native Houstonian that works in Austin, Texas for a tech company. Ryan is a proud Morehouse College graduate, and where he was really active on campus. And when I say active, he was really active on campus. He was a part of the Morehouse Student Ambassador Team, the Moot Court Team, and many other organizations. In spring 2016, the student body elected Ryan as the Student Government Association Vice President, where he served diligently on behalf of the entire Morehouse community. Ryan also had the opportunity to serve internships for Councilman Dwight Boykins, the Houston Forward Times newspaper, and State Representative Al Williams. One of Ryan's highest accomplishments is becoming an Eagle Scout, which is the highest award bestowed on a Boy Scout. He is also an active member of the Holman Street Baptist Church under the direction of our recently deceased pastor and shepherd teacher Manson B. Johnson II, where he serves as a minister and a leader of the Holman Street Youth Ministry. In his free time, Ryan enjoys spending time with his friends and family and reading. So welcome to the show, Ryan.
Thank you.
Next, we have a cousin of mine, Mr. Jared Clemons. Now, Jared is a political science PhD student at Duke University studying the politics of racial justice. More specifically, he asked the question, why do individuals support racial justice at certain times but not at others? Critically, he reviews the role that historical racism has played and continues to play in creating power structures that condition contemporary political efforts to achieve racial justice, particularly among those who identify politically as liberal. His work also considers the role that capitalism and neoliberalism play in maintaining racial inequality. Let's welcome Jared to the show.
Thank you.
Our next guest is Michael Smith. Now, Mike is a Lake Charles native. Mike is serving in his first term representing the Calcasieu Parish Police Jury District Number 2. Mike and his wife, Tricia, have 4 sons, Michael II, Bradford, Xavier, and they have 4 wonderful grandchildren. Mike is a proud graduate of Washington Marion Magnet High School. Woo, woo, go Charging Indians.
As well.
of Southwest Louisiana, now known as ULL. He is also the owner and agent of Big Mike Bail Bonds and Consulting Services in Lake Charles. Mike is an active member of Mount Calvary Baptist Church and the North Lake Charles Kiwanis, and also the Washington Marion Alumni Association. Mike also gives back to the community. He serves as a volunteer basketball and baseball coach. In his spare time, Mike loves spending time with his friends and family, and he loves ATV riding. I see him doing mud rides all the time on Facebook.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here, man.
Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thank you for having me.
Our final guest tonight, panelist, is Mr. Darrin Brown. Darrin is a global consultant specializing in advancing human and organizational performance. He specializes in organizational effectiveness, executive coaching, leadership engagement, change management, and organizational culture. He has over 25 years of business development and performance improvement experience in increasing individual and organizational performance. Darrin is also a doctoral candidate with an emphasis in strategic organizational effectiveness from Regent University. He received his MBA in business and marketing from American Intercontinental University and a Bachelor of Science from University of Phoenix. He is also an adjunct professor at Belhaven University School of Business and Leadership. And he is also, with me, a certified leadership coach with the John Maxwell team. Let's welcome Darrin to the show. So, guys, thank you again for coming on the show, and I'm looking forward to some good dialogue here. You know, this is a hot topic, and so let's just dive into the conversation. And I'm going to start off by throwing this first question. I want everyone to answer this question, but I'm going to start it off by sending it to Ryan first. The question is, what conversation are you having at home? Well, Ryan, you don't have any children, but everybody else that have children, what conversations are you having at home with friends and family about this George Floyd murder?
Yeah, I think the conversation right now is it could have easily been me. And to be honest, we've all had the conversation. I've had the conversation with my parents when it first started with Trayvon Martin. And that was, I was still in high school, actually. I had to have that conversation in high school. I've now graduated from college and I'm 3 years out of college and we're still having the same conversation. And it's, you know, as much as you may be right, as much as you may be correct, as much as you may be polite, as much as the police officer may be disrespectful to you, it's still on us just to, you know, quote unquote, get home alive. And so it plays into this notion of having to police what we say and not be able to have the same justices as other people. So I think it's that conversation of fairness, of we still are not where we are supposed to be in terms of equality. And the conversation right now that I've been having with my parents is, you know, it could have easily been me. So I think it's just a struggle right now, and be having to continue having this conversation over and over again. Yeah,
absolutely. Jared?
Yeah, so I don't want to belabor the point. I think I share pretty much the similar sentiments as Ryan. And as someone who, so most of my research is understanding kind of the origins of racism, not just in America, but just globally as well. And so many of the conversations I have with my family and my friends are usually just trying to offer some, a theoretical or at least an academic grounding of kind of the origins of what we're seeing now. And so I think it's important to understand that that racism is something that has been around for a long time. And so while it may seem as though some of the issues that we're facing are kind of unique to kind of our contemporary era, these are issues that are very deep-seated. And so most of the conversations I've had have just been trying to help people understand kind of how we got to this point and then hopefully what we can do to get out of it.
Absolutely. Mike?
Okay. I have 3 older sons, and they pretty much watched it and watched it unfold on television. So they kind of understand. But my biggest concern, I have a 12-year-old at home, and young black young man, and I have a hard time trying to explain to him what's going on, because this is some of the world that we do live in, and it's kind of strange for him to actually watch this on a video to see this actually going on. Because you always teach young kids, older kids, whatever, that all the policemen are there to protect and serve. You do have a lot of good police out there. Sometimes you may have some bad. And he had a hard time trying to understand that, because that's one of the things he wanted to be, as an actual policeman. So he see this unfolding in front of him, and it's kind of hard to explain to a 12-year-old, this is how it is sometimes. So I want to make sure all my kids do, come back home. That's the biggest concern.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And Darrin?
Wow. So this is a tough conversation for me as well, because, just as all of us, we've all had our personal experiences, with law enforcement, just pulling us over, and how we panic, today, no matter what we're doing when law enforcement gets behind us. So one of the conversations that I'm having, my kids are older, but they're still my kids, right? So I have a 27-year-old son. My other two daughters are a little bit older, but I'm constantly having conversations with my 27-year-old son, because what these young men do, how they live. They like to have fun. They like to run around in bunches. So one of the things that I'm doing with my son is just telling him how he has to make certain that he watches the projection and a perception that he's giving off, to law enforcement and to authorities. When you see a police officer, how to respond to a police officer. Don't make any immediate turns if you're driving, because all of a sudden they see that as suspicious. I'm even talking to him just a little historical account, where police come from, how police started, chasing down slaves. And then last but not least, how to play offense so you don't have to play defense. Making certain what to do when the police stops you, where your hands should be. Immediately flip that light on. Immediately put your hands on the steering wheel. Call that police officer. Yes, sir. No, sir. No, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Let them know that you're not a threat, because any of us could be next.
Sure, absolutely, and that's actually perfect in terms of the direction to give your son. I was having a conversation just yesterday with a group of people actually within the John Maxwell team, and I said, when my worries is when my son drove here from North Dakota and got ready to go back home, we said a prayer, but in our prayer we said, please, Heavenly Father, protect him from running into a racist police officer that may want to hurt him, right? And I said to them, you see, you don't have to add that in your prayer, where we have to add that type of language or comment in your prayer request to God. We always want to be protected, but so it's just a different level of conversation. So how does it make you feel, or how does it feel to have people make assumptions that you are dangerous or that you're a criminal just because of the color of your skin? And any person can answer that question.
So I'll jump in there first. It makes me feel, sometimes it makes me, I want to be angry, right? I want to match the intensity with the intensity, but of course, art of war, right? You don't match force with force. So if I allow it to, but said, I know why I'm here, and I know why I'm called, and I know what I'm supposed to be doing. So the system wants to make me feel, and sometimes you think it psychologically, it messes with your self-esteem. Yes. It messes with your self-confidence. You start to begin and you start to wonder about your own value as an individual. And then, you get back to remembering again why you're here, what you're doing, the impact that you're making, in your family, and the impact that you're making in this world, and what you're called to do. And all of a sudden that re-inspires you, that re-motivates you, that reinvigorates you to get out and do what you need to do. But honestly, if I'm here to tell the truth, it will chip away at your self-esteem. If you're not mindful of who you are and what you've been called to do.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes it's kind of, making, it's kind of funny sometimes, the whole talking about, going into the elevator and, somebody just start holding their purse pretty tight.
Yeah.
You come in there, I kind of look at it as, to me, as being funny. But somebody may take it to being an offense because they don't know how to handle it. But I've been around over 50 years old, so I know exactly what's going to happen and how it's going to happen and when it's going to happen. So I can tell you that. So I just take it in stride and just say, hey, some people just never change.
Okay, all right. So let me ask you this, and Jared, I want you to start with this answer. So, what role does government, whether it's the local governments, the state government, federal, what role does government play in these conversations?
In these conversations, you mean the conversations just around policing strategy or
Yes.
policy?
Yeah, around policing strategy. Yeah.
Yeah. So Darrin kind of hit on it earlier when he mentioned that historically, police were in the South, particularly, were used to capture runaway slaves, largely, but mainly during Reconstruction and later. And so we have to understand that policing in America was never meant to be. Policing in America was primarily set up to preserve property white men. That was those were the primary concerns that were the primary aims of the institution of policing. And so I think what we're seeing now is we have an institution that in a lot of ways is not only outdated, but it's just inherently racist. And so how do you then work with a system that was structured and it was created to do the very things that we're asking it not to do, which is to be antagonistic towards Black people? And so that's a hard question. And so there are some academics who have devoted their whole career to understanding exactly kind of some policies that we could adopt that could get us out of this situation. And so one thing that we've noticed is that, for instance, I lived in New York for a good bit of time, and while I lived in New York, I lived in Bedford-Stuyvesant, which is obviously a predominantly Black neighborhood, a very large immigrant population. And many community leaders in Bed-Stuy repeatedly asked for investments in schools and parks and other types of community resources that people could access to obviously do the things that could help them live a more fulfilling and enriching life. And the city oftentimes diverted the money that was requested to policing. And so, as we always say, if you look for certain things, you're bound to find them. And so when you have communities that are just constantly policed, it just ends up being, it's a setup for a terrible situation. And so we just really have to get really creative and strategic about really what it is we want the idea of policing to look like. But the current state is not sustainable.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Mike, you're a police juror here.
Well, I mean, the biggest thing we look at sometimes, getting more, policemen involved with the community, like community policing, come out to the areas to meet the people. You want to know who people are patrolling. So I kind of push for them to do more patrols. They all come out there and do like seminars dealing with the elderly, the young people. So if they become more and more involved with the community, they actually know what's going on in the community, and everybody know one another. So that's my biggest concern, to make sure that we have more community police, more community activities for the police, and invite them in. Just don't come to the area when there's the actual problem. Just come in. Like I said, I do see a lot of them going around sometimes playing ball with the kids, just being more interactive. So, because, there's not always crime, but so there's always policing. So you want to make sure that you have a balance, and they come out more in the community and interact with everybody. Sure.
Absolutely. So, Ryan, I want you to start us with this question, because you're the young one of the group here. And I want you to really talk about this, because your age group is more actively involved in social media and social causes, right? So what does the media, whether that's print media, radio media, or social media, do they have an obligation to portray people accurately and fairly? And if they do, what is that obligation?
So yeah, media, social media, all types of media, all those platforms play a huge role in our everyday life. And thankfully, someone recorded that video, posted it on social media, and instantly it went viral. Just imagine how many people did not have that opportunity to have a camera in front of them. Imagine how many people before social media didn't have, voices to tweet to or be able to organize, I guess you could say. And I think that's what social media can be used for. It can definitely help. It can hurt, but I think social media is great right now for these causes. But at the same time, I don't think that tweeting is not enough. Having turning your Facebook page black for the day is great, but I don't think that is enough. But I think that the media has a large influence on how things are shaped, and I also think that it's important to invest more in Black media, because it's Black media that will tell our stories accurately with real facts. It's Black media that's going to put our stuff at the forefront. CNN and MSNBC and Fox, they are our main platforms, but at the same time, we don't have the same advantages if we were to have Black media, if we were to have Black newspapers and be able to actually utilize them as we should. So I think if we could put more emphasis on definitely Black media, I think that we can definitely get our stories told the way that they should be.
Okay. All right. So Darrin, excuse me, the role of, Ryan talked about the role of what media will play in this, but when we think of the portrayals that we see in media, for example, when we look at the young lady in New York, I believe it was, they were in a park, and she said she was going to call the police on this young man, right? And said, said he was a Black man trying to attack her, right? So when this broke on the news, I want to say first, did you see that incident?
Absolutely.
Okay, all right. So then when the news played this, do you think that they emphasized the right points initially for this, or do you think that they could have done a better job of identifying the issue here and help correctly identify this person for what she could have done to this young man?
No. So they covered the story and they told the story for what it was. They did not dive deep into, the cause and the structure that allowed her to be able to make such a bold proclamation to him with the very intent of having the police to come out and do whoever knows what to this young man. So the media, they failed in, and I don't know if it's their responsibility or not, but I'm going to put it on them anyway, because if they choose to report the story, then we're going to ask them to, take the extra level of responsibility to go deeper and to make certain that you put those types of stories out there, but put it out there with the constructs as to how this behavior is acceptable in America. What's the genesis of this behavior, and what are the consequences of this behavior? So when we talk about those three things, we talk about the constructs, that holds it up right now. We talked about the genesis, where it comes from, and then we can talk about the consequences, if her actions were successful. So to answer your question, did the media do a good job? The media did not do a good job, and the media does have a responsibility to check for veracity of stories that are put out there, to make certain that the truth is being delivered to the American public, because that's just what we live by now. We live by this information.
Okay, all right. And Jared, so one of the in your bio, so the question that you asked, why do individuals support racial justice at certain times but not at other times? Do you believe that the media helps people buy in at certain times and not in other times, or just inherent in us as human beings to have that bias?
So I don't want to say it's inherent in your to someone to be racist. And so the reason I say that is because there's a lot of research that shows that children don't recognize the idea, or they don't understand the social significance of race. So we know that race is not a biological construct. It's a social and political construct that is actually a relatively new phenomenon. So the notion of race really didn't come into being until maybe the late 16th, early 17th century. So with that being said, we know it's not biological, otherwise it would have been here since the beginning.
Right.
So with that being said, like a lot of what is it's some of it is taught, like actually taught that these people are this or those people are that. But more of it is it's just the way that we're socialized to understand the world. And so there's a really good book that I would recommend that everyone read. It's called The White Racial Frame. It's by a sociologist named Joe Fagan. And what he argues is that essentially whites in America are systematically, essentially don't learn anything about the notion of race. So they don't learn the history of racism in America or broadly. And so for many of them, like situations like this are legitimately a rude awakening. But the catch-22 is that while they don't learn the issues of racism, they do learn that they, even if either covertly or just kind of inadvertently, learn that there are benefits, social and political benefits that they receive from being white. And so it's like a weird kind of dynamic that I think manifests interestingly. And so one thing that I think we don't want to think about is just thinking about racism as just being some type of like attitudinal or so-and-so hates so-and-so. Sure. And so the reason I thought the Amy Cooper situation was interesting, and this isn't something that the media talked about much, but Amy Cooper actually voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016, and so I think that's illuminating for a couple of reasons. One, because there's typically this notion that, you know, if you vote Democrat, that kind of absolves you from being a part of this conversation, which we know could be further from the truth. And second, it kind of shows you that just how deeply entrenched racism is. And so you can be the most sympathetic person in the world, and then at a moment's notice, you can lean into, for a lack of a term, lean into your white privilege in ways that can be very detrimental to Black folks. So I just think we have to think about racism as being a very multifaceted phenomenon.
Sure, absolutely, yeah. So not surprisingly, our brains automatically use categories. Our brain's use of automatic categories, is really risky with respect to race, right? The widespread stereotype of Black criminality makes it more likely that a cell phone may appear like a gun when it's carried by a Black person rather than with a white person. And there's been some data that shows that, right? Implicit bias refers to the process of associating stereotypes or attitudes toward categories of people without conscious awareness, right? Everyone has some type of implicit bias or unconscious bias. So my question to each of you is, does implicit bias or unconscious bias play a role in these type of situations? And let's start with Mike.
It's kind of hard, but yeah, I would think so, because, you know, just like you said, you know, racism, you know, is not, you know, a person's not born into it. It's something like he's actually taught. A person is taught, you know, sometime over the course of time. It just really depends on your social background, your social upbringing. You know, sometimes, like I say, it's just kind of hard to explain. But yeah, I do agree with that. You know, it's kind of hard in this society. You know, you don't want to make prejudiced decisions. You know what I'm saying? But, you know, people do have the actual mindset, and, you know, they may think that it's actual a cell phone in a white person's hand, or maybe maybe a gun in a Black person's hand. So you know, it just kind of been like within. And like I said, even myself, you know, as today, I ride down the road and I may see a policeman, you know, it just kind of crunch up a little bit. So that still goes on, you know, from based on my early day up until now. So yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Sure. Darrin, you want to?
Yeah, I'll jump in there. So I'll touch on a few things, and I'll keep it under two titles: social learning theory and cultural indoctrination. So Mike was just talking about how it's taught. That behavior is learned, right? That behavior is learned. So whether you're intentionally taught that behavior or not, from a racism perspective or a racist perspective, you literally learn this behavior from the people that you're around. You learn it from the television shows you watch. If we think back, Cedrick and Mike and Jared, to some of the shows that we watch, Ryan, I won't leave you out because we some very people here, right? But if you think back, some of that stuff was inherent in some of the shows that we watch. So when we talk about social learning theory, you don't have to be taught. You just have to observe. And when you observe, you learn these things and you learn these behaviors, and you learn that Black is associated with darkness. Black is associated with wrong. You look right in the dictionary. White is associated with what? With pure, with clean, with pristine. So just looking at these particular words, right, and how they're associated. And then last but not least on this, this is something that I talk to people about often, right? I talk to people about racists and I talk to people about racism. I can't speak for you gentlemen. When I was younger, I said, that white boy, that white person, that cracker, that this, that was me being racist. That was me having a racial outburst toward another ethnicity, right?
Right.
So we all have some biases that you talked about. But as we grow older and as we mature, we know how to control those things, and we know what's right and what's wrong, and we behave in that manner. Racism is the key. Being racist is not good, but racism is having the power to oppress another group or ethnicity because of your racist views. So that's where we have white people with money who come into power or politics or police because they have the ability to oppress someone with their racist views. And that's what makes racism.
Sure.
Question.
Go back. Yeah. Just like you said, it's kind of like, we grew up in a time where we, watched like All in the Family. I don't know, these days a show would be on TV like that. Where you had George Jefferson going against Archie Bunker, calling them different names, white this, black this, whatever. So I don't think it would go on TV today.
Even with George called Tom on the Jeffersons,
right.
All type of names, and it was fun television. But we grew up in those implicit biases and that implicit thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Question: I've wrestled with the argument all the time of, can Black people be racist? And I don't want to just have a quick question. Can Black people be racist? I know you talked about a specific race oppressing another race. And a lot of people have argued that as African Americans, we don't have the ability to oppress another group or another race.
So remember when you look at the ism and it, right? So racist is an actual thought process. It is an actual perception. Racist. This is how that person thinks about this particular group, or this is or that ethnicity. Racism is the practice of oppression. So when you look at the two words, they have different meanings, and I'll let some of the other brothers talk because I don't want to, right? So guys, what do you think?
Jared?
Yeah, so I think this is an interesting question, and I think it's an easy one that people kind of trip up on. So for me, I tend to not try to get, I call it in the
weeds.
I call it like the searching for racist. It's just kind of like I feel like in trying to, are you racist? Who's racist? Can I be racist? Or is there so and so racist? I feel like it kind of diverts the attention away from the broader conversation, which is the fact that racism is an institutional economic system that over generations has reinforced inequalities. And so what I like to do is I say that everyone can have some form of prejudice. And I think it's a better way to, because I think the term racism racism for a number of reasons, it just kind of forecloses any opportunity to be able to have any type of constructive conversation. And so what I try to say is that when we're talking about people having preconceived notions or biases towards someone else that usually manifest in some type of negative treatment. I say anyone can have prejudice. I mean, I could have a prejudice towards someone who wears a purple shirt because I don't like purple. I'm just using an example. But like Darrin said, when we talk about racism, like these are institutions, these are laws, these are systems that have over years kind of been constructed to keep a certain class of people in a lower position. And so I think it's more constructive to have the conversation about racism versus just say, oh, well, who's racist, who's not racist? And then you get into questions of, well, if I'm poor, can I be racist if I don't have power? And then it just ends up kind of muddling the whole conversation. So I personally try to keep prejudice and racism kind of divorced. And I find that when I do that, we're able to have a more constructive conversation about the structural nature of racism.
I love that, Jared. Thank you. I love that. I'll take that.
Definitely.
Prejudice is a much better term. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. So how do we reduce these implicit or unconscious biases? What actions do we take? Anyone can start. I'd like to get some feedback from all four of you, because this one could have a lot of different opinions on how do we impact implicit bias.
Are we speaking specifically in the realm of policing or just generally?
So, yeah. So I'm specifically talking about implicit bias. Could be very, very. I want to just like target when a Black man is walking down the street and you cringe, or you move to the other side of the street, right? Whereas if that same person, same demographic, the only difference is that person was white, you would continue walking down the street, right? So in that context, how do we impact that, improve that?
I think it kind of plays into respectability politics. And I think it's kind of hard for us, it's like we can't be ourselves because we're so busy trying to make other groups comfortable so that they can walk across the street, so that when a lady is walking and I'm walking, we're meeting each other, she clutches her purse, as opposed to, like you said, someone else, she's fine. So I think it just kind of plays into respectability politics of the whole, you can't say pull up your pants, or you can't say, speak a certain way, quote unquote, because, we've seen people who meet all of that criteria and they're still targeted by these African Americans are still targeted by police officers. They're still, at work, they can't be their full selves. So I think I genuinely don't know the answer to that because it's hard with the respectability politics of trying to be your full self while still trying to make someone else comfortable.
Okay. Jared?
Yeah, so I think this is a great question. And so I think it's going to be, unless we could get PBS or something to air a nationwide like implicit bias thing, I don't think that you're going to be able to get everyone to engage in that type of learning process. So what I think we should focus on is recognize that there are very specific instances where implicit biases or these prejudices that we have can have very real impacts on people. So we know there's a lot of research that shows that there's a great deal of prejudice in bias in medicine, for instance, and a lot of doctors often don't. I mean, Serena Williams was very transparent about this, and she experienced a lot of pain and complications with her pregnancy, and repeatedly said to her doctors and to the medical staff that things didn't feel right, and she was experiencing pain that she didn't think was normal. And, they essentially told her, it's no big deal. This is normal. But what we know is that there is an implicit bias towards Black women being able to experience a higher pain threshold and other things like that. And so oftentimes they don't get the treatments that they need. I remember seeing a story of a Black woman in Brooklyn who actually had gone to a hospital to get tested for COVID. And she described the symptoms she had been receiving, and they essentially told her, "Oh, it's normal. Like you can handle it." And again, that goes back into the biases that we have towards Black women and paying thresholds and always being a strong Black woman and so on and so forth. And then same with policing, like we've talked about, there's bias towards Black men because of the relationship or the ideas towards with Blackness being dangerous. And so I think what we should do is focus on those jobs and those areas, whether it's medicine or teaching or law enforcement, where we know implicit biases can have very, very, very real impacts on people, and it could easily mean their livelihood. And so I think we can put safeguards in place. Maybe don't equip cops with certain tools that could easily take someone's life, or don't equip essentially have second opinions in the hospital, if a doctor is hearing what a patient is saying. And I think there are mechanisms that you can put in place to kind of minimize the impact of implicit bias in areas where they could have very real consequences for people.
Sure, absolutely. Anyone else want to say anything on that before we move on?
Yeah. So where our country is right now, we're at the point of revolution, which means that we have to do some revolutionary things, some things that we've never done before. And right. I think that it's important that, I see two things, and they might be far-fetched, but it's things that we still can do. We still can try, and maybe somebody can better those ideas. I'm ready to get rid of all the terminology, Black, white, and all of that other stuff. I'm ready to get rid of that terminology. Why does that still exist? Why does that still make room for us to say, well, oh, I'm Black? For America to take a census? Look where that has gotten us today. So I'm ready for that to completely go away, those labels, because the moment we label someone, then that's what they are, right? That's number one. The labels can go away. Number two, we have to do a much better job in all of our places of education and our workplaces if we want to see this country, move to a better place of a united front and to kill some of those biases. We have to do a better job at diversity training, diversity classes, whether it's in high school. Yeah, kids go to school together, and so they just expect them to learn diversity haphazardly, unintentionally, but without talking about some of the cultural learnings, some of the cultural implications, some of those things in the workplace, all those things. Because even if you work with someone for a while, or you don't work with someone, but you work in the same building, and all of a sudden, as Ryan said, you walk past someone and they're clenching their purse. You hear them locking their car doors when you walk up.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that we have to do a better job of, in our schools, in our places of education, talking more about culture and diversity. And again, I'm ready to get rid of the labels. I don't think the labels do us any good outside of, government counters. Okay.
Go ahead, Darrin.
Can I just two-finger the point about getting rid of the labels? Because I think that's a really interesting proposition. So I did some research on understanding race and racism in France. And so they actually don't take any census information or document at all race in France. And so essentially the only thing they ask in the census is whether or not you're a French citizen, and I think your nation of origin if you were an immigrant. That's it. There's no race, there's no ethnicity, there's nothing like that. The issue is, and I think that this is an ideal that eventually we should strive towards, because I agree, I think the categories, they're markers. And so for a lot of people, the idea of Black has just been so steeped in like all of these notions of violence and so on and so forth that we know are not true, but that's what people associate with it. But what happens in France is that essentially we know that a lot of the issues that are associated with race and prejudice and discrimination and so forth still exist. And so when people actually contest these acts of discrimination, the French government was like, we don't have race here. I mean, there's no data, there's no information, so you can't prove it. And so I think that is what we should be striving towards. I just wonder how we can both recognize that there are historical inequalities that are going to result even if we got rid of it, while also saying that these categories ultimately are meaningless and they only exist to discriminate. So it's like a weird kind of balance you have to strike, I think.
Dichotomy, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I just think, this should be an ongoing event. You know what I'm saying? 365, just every day, because we have to preach it, have to teach it, have to change everybody's mindset. Just what happened to Mr. Floyd, which is very, very tragic. It kind of brought everybody together, but this need to be ongoing. just not for 2 weeks and then we stop and then we go back to, so say, normal. So I think, like I say, having the labels, sometimes we don't understand, why we have to answer that question on a job application. Why does it matter? I'm a black, white, whatever, it doesn't matter. I can do the job. So, but I just think, just ongoing, social, education about race, just keep it going. So hopefully one day this will turn around.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm going to go to a question that someone posted on Facebook, Jared Joseph, but there's like 4 questions in here. So I'm going to kind of break this down. First of all, his question was, and anyone can take it, says, what are the goals of the protests and riots going on in America? Now I'm going to say this first. So first of all, there's a difference between the protest and the riots. Okay, there are people that are set up to do some of this stuff. So we have to separate those two. But I'm going to stop there. I'm going to let you guys, because you're the experts, I'm going to let you guys jump on that and answer that for him. So
I'll jump in first.
Okay.
The goals of the protest and riot. So when you talk about it, so Cedrick has already differentiated, the two of what they are. And I say this, what happened to Mr. Floyd was a horrible thing. And I think Mr. Floyd, and I think a lot of us believe that, was the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back. There are a number of issues out here, and I have some of those issues that when you talk about what the goals were, right? So number one, criminal justice system and criminal justice reform. We've been crying for that for years and nothing has been done. I've been posting and spreading pictures, before my time, I'm 47 years old, of police mistreating African Americans, spraying them with water hoses, sicking dogs on them, doing those things. Police have been constantly found to be, innocent of crimes against African Americans, killing no matter what it's been. So while there's not a defined goal, these are some of the issues that's boiling over, and we know what they are. They're understood. Criminal justice, healthcare inequalities, not just healthcare going to the doctor, but mental health. So guys, as we know, many of us, our parents and forefathers, once they came out of Jim Crow, the generation before them, once they came out of slavery, they never received, out of the cotton fields, they never received any mental therapy. When we were young and kids, right, Cedrick, Mike, Darrin, I'm not certain, right, but we were teased about going to the counselor to get our mental therapy, issues taken care of. Oh, you go and see a shrink. Remember that?
Right.
So we were teased about those things, and we never, received the proper health care nor the proper mental health. And then now we're talking about education, right? And it's not just about college, because there is a number of places to get educated. And though many of us have high levels of education, there are a number of places of education. But here is one of the places where we struggled for education, and we still struggle for education today. We were never taught finances. Nobody ever taught us anything about credit. Nobody ever taught us anything about money. And Cedrick, you know this just as well as many of us do. Not learning about finances and not learning about credit. And credit, the basis of credit is personal development, because it's all about credibility. And nobody ever talked to us about personal values and education from an educational perspective, about credibility, about integrity. That's all credit is. How well you've kept your word when somebody loans you some money. It's about your credibility and integrity as an individual. So we've been undereducated, under healthcare, criminal justice reform, and personal development, man. So those are really the goals that we're fighting for. And I won't say personal development as much, because a lot of people don't fight for that. Right? But education, in all forms, including financial, healthcare, including mental health, and criminal justice reform, prison, and policing. Those are the goals that we've been fighting for. And Mr. Floyd was the camel that broke the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back.
Sure. Yeah. And the second part, I think you handled that first question. The second part of the question was, when and how will we know when we've made progress, and what do we do? And what do we want progress to look like? And
I just think it's going to be, ongoing. It's going to be a never-ending cycle. It's going to keep on going until people be satisfied amongst themselves. because it's kind of hard to to satisfy everybody. So because we all have one goal, but it's just very hard to satisfy everybody. So like with education, talking about different things, opening up the negotiations and opening, like I say, it did break the camel's back because we all was in this pandemic and everything just bottled up, and you figure you're living in one of the best countries in the world, and this could happen right here. So a lot of people kind of lost faith, and like I say, that just pushed everybody over the edge.
Sure. Jared, were you going to say something with that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so I tend to suggest that people, I know this is hard, but not to think about the world as in terms of progress, because I think when we think of the term progress, we think of a linear trajectory, and the world does not operate like that. So there's a really good book by Carol Anderson called White Rage, and what she essentially talks about is that historically, that anytime there's been some types of gains made by whether it's been through the civil rights movement or with the Civil War and the beginning of Reconstruction, they've been confronted with very intense state pushback. And so a lot of times, I know we hate to say it, it's one of the, one step forward, two steps back type situation. And so rather than thinking about things in terms of progress, I think we should ask ourselves, what are the things that we want to see? Like if we could envision, wave a magic wand and structure the world that we would want to see, like I think having a higher goal or overarching goal that we can describe, I think we can then actually think about like tactically, okay, what would that entail? Okay, we want to see this. Okay, that means we need to do this, and that. But I think if we just focus strictly on progress without actually kind of delineating the world we want to envision, then I think it makes it harder. And I think if we get so caught up I think it's also a way to become just kind of disenchanted and disappointed with the whole situation. And so I just think we should be careful about thinking about the world in terms of a linear progression versus like one that is kind of like a sine curve, just up and down, up and down.
Sure, absolutely. So Ryan, this question is for you. Ryan I believe that Ryan is going to be one of those leaders, not only in the city of Houston, not only in the state of Texas, but on a national level. He just has that type of talent. So Ryan, for you, what do you want to see? Jared just said, hey, we probably should think about what it is we want to see. What do you want to see for the future?
Right. I think I would like to see politicians passing the torch to a new generation. I think that we've tried so many different ways with politics. And I'm not saying that we should just like our politicians are our saviors, but I think it's time for a lot of these politicians to pass the torch. And I think specifically in this situation, some people literally just want the other three officers involved in the George Floyd case to be convicted as well. And so a lot of people are, as everyone has seen the quote by now that Dr. King is saying, a riot is the language of the unheard. And so I think that this generation is approaching things differently than per se, Dr. King and the peaceful protest. And I'm not saying that the rioting is right or wrong, but I think that it is a response to what we've tried so far. We tried the hashtags, we've tried the kneeling, we've tried the peaceful protesting, we've tried making our profiles black, all that kind of stuff. So I think that right now we just want to see viable change. And I think it won't just come overnight, of course, but I think gradually, as I think if generations start training each other, and I think if we start listening to one another, then I think that we can slowly achieve this common goal of change that we're seeking. And so I think that is something that we're looking for. We just want to be heard. We just want to have peace. So I think those are just some of the things that we're looking for. And of course, everything that Mr. Brown said earlier in that answer, those are some of the main topics that young people are really fighting for in their protests and their riots on social media. These are the main things that we are fighting for. And it seems like, we have not achieved it yet. So I think that we have a rising generation of leaders who are on fire, willing and wanting to make change with the integrity, with the right intent, with people in mind, that put morals over money. And I think that when we start being able to have generations training the next generation later, then I think that we'll be able to make some type of viable change. But I think that there is a rising generation of leaders that are on fire that are willing to make change.
Okay.
So can I mention one thing real quick? Number one,
absolutely.
Ryan, you made me feel old talking about Mr. Brown.
Sorry.
It's all good. It's all good, right?
Mr. Darrin. Okay.
So I just want to give kudos for a couple of things that Ryan said, and I want to make 2 points and just 2 words: collectivism, group economics. We got to get back there. In order to make that happen, just like us 5 men are together right here, right now, we live in a place of individualism. And everything around us has been based off individual performance and rewards. And so here's what we said: Negro, I got mine, you better get yours. We have to get back to a sense of community, a sense of collectivism, a sense of group economics, pooling our money, getting together, starting our clubs, making certain that, okay, look, Ryan, you got your credit score 800, we getting our credit score 800, right? We want to be able to do those things to be able to gain and get that access. And until we can do it from a united front, right? Mm-hmm. We can't stop our young men from getting shot in the street. It's our community, Black men. It's our responsibility. That's not happening to Middle Eastern people, not happening to Chinese people in America, no other race. And what race, I hate to say this because I'm one, but what race of us are the most separated from a male perspective? Black men. We got to get together.
Okay. All right. So we're getting close to 30 after the hour. And so what I want is for each of you to look in this camera. There are people of different races, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different sexual orientations. They are listening to you right now. I want to start with Mike, and we'll go Mike, Darrin, Ryan, and Jarrett. I want you to tell them, what can they do to make a change in their community? What impact can they have on this racial tension in the U.S.?
Okay, well, I always say, get involved. Make sure that you try to make a goal every day to come out there and reach someone, teach someone, grab somebody, and make sure that you take care of that person to get them involved in your community. The biggest thing we're trying to fight now is people voting. Like Ryan say, they have a lot of young leaders out there, but I'm always trying to figure out how to get them young folks to the polls. That's my biggest concern right there, because I know, I can't do this forever. So, voting, that's my biggest push. Getting more involved in the community, getting more involved in schools, making sure that the schools, stay open. Make sure that, just got to help people, because, we are put on this earth for a purpose. And I always say, make sure you fulfill your purpose and make sure you do something to help the next man. Like Mr. Brown said, I got mine, you have to get yours. A lot of people feel that way. I mean, I always say a person does not really worry about anything if it doesn't affect their front door. You know what I'm saying? If it doesn't come to their yard or whatever, they don't care. I live in Lake Charles. I used to always say, a person, have a car, a house, a job, they just sit. That's it. But like I say, we have to, change the mindset. Like I say, get everybody credit score up, teach financial literacy at a young age. Make sure, no one ruins their credit before they make it to college or in college. So it's all about education, and make sure you do something to, uplift your community instead of tear it down.
Awesome. Darrin?
So I think something that other groups can do, number one, mentor someone. Reach out and mentor someone to be able to understand their cultural background. So if I can talk to, people of other race, other ethnicities, I would tell them, seek someone that's in your community, seek someone that's in your workplace, and reach out to them and establish that connection, establish that relationship with them in order to be able to understand their perspective. Because what we're missing in this country, we're missing empathy in this country. That's one of the things. I didn't say sympathy. You don't have to feel sorry, but it's important to be able to understand somebody's perspective, where they came from, understand culture and understand trauma and understand how it impacts some of the behaviors that you're seeing today. So mentorship, empathy, and understanding culture and how it plays a role in a person's behavior. And that would truly help us to have a greater understanding of our collective community.
Awesome. Ryan?
Listen to others, listen to other people that don't look like you, that don't think like you. I think that is I was listening to a sermon this morning. Someone said that America's greatest problem is that we don't listen to one another. So I think we should take some time listening and just hearing someone else's perspective. You know, why did you vote for Donald Trump? Why did you decide to, anything? Listen, learn more, read more. I think that people can learn so much by just simply reading. And I think that not getting your information necessarily from social media, being more than a social media activist, using your privilege for those people when you're at parties, when you're at in those settings, challenging those executive boards at your company to make sure that the company is diverse, to make sure that that they're not all white men on your board. So I think that those things are some things that that other groups can do to make progress.
Sure, absolutely. Jared?
Yeah, so I think everyone else has already made great points, so I won't beat a dead horse. But I'll just leave everyone with this one quote that's actually my wallpaper from the late Toni Morris, and it's the function of freedom is to free someone else. And so if you're in a position to do something for someone to make someone's life better, do it. And don't think twice about it. And I think we have to understand that until all of us are free and until all of us can take freedom for granted, none of us will ever be free. And so once again, the function of freedom is to free someone else.
I absolutely love that quote, Jared. I'm going to have to take that. I love that. So for the audience, here's what I want. I want to give you a couple of questions to take away. We had 4 outstanding young men, Black young men right here. And I want you to know all 4 of them have at least a bachelor's degree from college. 2 of them are doctoral candidates right now. And so I want you to understand, when you see a Black man, you don't have to be afraid. Not everybody is trying to hurt you. And I know I'm talking in general, not to everybody out there. But here's one question I want you to take. What do you have direct control over that needs to change in order to address any form of discrimination, implicit, unconscious bias, racial anxiety, or even racial threat? Right. So what do you have direct control over that needs to change in order to address any form of discrimination? That's the first question. The second question for you, audience, to take is, what institutions in your community need to change to address these forms of discrimination? You see, when you take these 2 questions, they're not yes or no questions. They're questions that's going to make you dive deep within yourself, have the conversation with your family. Right. And I know it's difficult sometimes, but everything worthwhile is uphill. If you want to help make a change in America, if you want to help make life better for every citizen, you will take these questions and have that conversation. I love this quote. The function of freedom is to free someone else. Take these questions and help free someone else in your community. So I want to thank you very much, first of all, to my panel for coming in tonight. Audience, if you enjoyed this discussion tonight, just type yes for me in the comments. That's what I want them to see. All right. And then we're here normally every Monday night. Today, this is a special session. Thank you for joining in to Talk Leadership with Cedrick. Everybody needs a little TLC in their life. So thank you again. And I hope that you will join us again next Monday. And that is it for tonight, folks.